Alright, this is the Psilo book review, number 3. This time I read the book called Frankenstein by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This book is 333 pages, and it took me about 1 week to read. So, as always, I'm going to give it a score out of 100, starting with the characters. For characters, I gave it a 95 out of 100, just due to how interesting each of the characters was, how relatable, how real and vivid they seemed as they were described. This was a longer book than the other two that I've previously read, so it definitely gave it more time for the characters to grow on you and for them to develop over time. I had seen a few Frankenstein movies in the past, but they really weren't this story, and I don't think I've ever seen a movie that actually portrays this original Frankenstein story, so this was really interesting to read for the first time. For the author's diction, I gave it a 90 out of 100, just based on the way the book is written. It's very much in the style of journal entries, whether it be the main character writing back home to his family, or whether it's Dr. Frankenstein describing his story, or whether it's Frankenstein's monster giving a description of his life and why he did what he did. Each of the different characters describing their point of view seemed unique and definitely gave you insight into why they do what they do and how they think. Yeah, the characters seem very intelligent, especially Dr. Frankenstein, and even the main character, who very much seems like a younger version of Frankenstein. The setting, I gave a 95 out of 100, just because there were so many different locations in this story. I know there were parts of Russia in the story, Italy, Switzerland, France, Germany, I believe the Netherlands, England, Scotland, Ireland, France. So there's a lot of European countries and important cities, places that the characters go to throughout the story. And I love that it gives the exact names and details so that I'm able to look up those locations and kind of find out more of the history, and also maybe give some insight into why this story is written the way it was, due to the author most likely visiting some of those places in her life, or coming from maybe one of those places. As far as conflict goes, I gave it an 85 out of 100, just because there weren't any super epic fights that stand out to me in themselves. Whenever Frankenstein's monster gets into a fight, it's not much of a fight, so it's just, they're gone very quickly if they get into a fight with Frankenstein's monster. But there were some exciting conflicts still, and reasons for conflict were interesting, as well as the use of fire or firearms to scare away Frankenstein's monster, as well as unique ways of people dying. There's a few unique ways that the monster kills people. Surprises, I gave it a 95 out of 100, just because there's a lot of times where you think it was a certain person who did the killing when it was actually someone else, or you think you know what happened when in reality they go back, tell the story, and it happened quite a different way than you may have imagined. So yeah, there were a good amount of surprises in the story. You can't just predict what's going to happen. Even though I've seen movies before Frankenstein, it didn't really give me any insight into what was going to happen during the story. So it kept me entertained with all these surprises. As far as knowledge goes, I gave it a 95 out of 100 as well. It seemed like it was full of the titles of books that I myself could look up. The main character was a student of natural philosophy, as well as Dr. Frankenstein. He kind of goes through the books that he grew up on and how he was turned on to science later in life, after studying philosophers, after studying mystics, and after studying kind of more the paranormal side of things, as well as the main character in his pursuit of knowledge, or his pursuit of furthering the human advances in science. Yeah, I'll get back to that when I read some quotes. I believe I highlighted some of those parts. They definitely reference the Bible. They definitely reference a story known as Paradise Lost, which I believe the original story had something to do with inspiring this Frankenstein story, as the author quotes that book, I believe, twice in this story. As far as symbology goes, I gave it a 95 out of 100 as well. I think this story is really symbolic for the human journey. Every man who seeks, the truth, who is curious about philosophy. I think this story has a lot of lessons in it for them. Dr. Frankenstein is a relatable character, at least for me, he was. He seemed intelligent. He seemed like his goal in life was more than just the common man. Reminded me a bit of the main character in The Time Machine, or even the main character in Around the World in 80 Days. Although I would put this character, Dr. Frankenstein, even above them, I would say, as far as knowledge goes, but his story is a lot more sad than theirs, so it comes with its drawbacks for sure. Lessons. So yeah, the lessons, I gave it a 95 out of 100. Might even want to raise that. I'll raise that 3 points, actually, a 98 out of 100. Mostly because the lessons of the main character are really what stand out the most. Although he is so intelligent in science, he really lets his passions get the best of him. It leads him into further choices that he almost can't stop. He digs digs a deeper and deeper hole for himself until he has nobody left that cares about him. He has nothing left in his life that he even cares about. So it's a very sad story to see, but you hopefully as a reader will learn a lot of lessons from it. Almost remind me of a Romeo and Juliet type of sadness, how, you really feel for not only Dr. Frankenstein, but even his monster at times when he finally speaks and you realize how intelligent the being is that is behind that beast or that monster. And overall enjoyment of the story, I actually gave it a 99 out of 100. This was my favorite book so far that I've read out of the three, and I really enjoyed both of the other two books. So it's great that each book I'm reading, I seem to enjoy even more than the last. I seem to get even more out of it than I did the last. So I don't know how long that will continue, but yeah, this was the best book that I've read so far. I definitely recommend it to anyone who hasn't read the original Frankenstein story. The movies do not do it justice, like I said. So the overall score out of 1,000 is going to add up to 927 with that changed score. Remember, I added 3 extra points on the lessons section. So it's 927 out of 1,000. That's the highest score so far for a book that we've read. So the highest Psilo review score to date. Why I would recommend it is pretty much for just the overall beauty of the story. It was a beautiful story. It was from beginning to end. There were a lot of lessons. There were a lot of times where you're drawn in. You really think that there's going to be a happy life in store for the character. And then something unfortunately happens due to his own choices that really leads him down to a path of misery and living one of the worst lives in existence. It seems like a very miserable life in the end. But the life lessons are what really make this book complete, or what really become the icing on the cake is the lessons from the tragedy itself. The relatability, whether it be the main character's intelligence, Dr. Frankenstein, even, Frankenstein's monster, when he is speaking, there's a very much a relatability to that, a loneliness that can be related to anyone who feels like an outsider or who feels like they may be a combination of things that's not quite accepted in the regular world. Also, the influence on modern stories. While reading this, I decided to watch a few other Frankenstein movies that I hadn't seen, especially older ones like shot in the 60s, or I don't know if there's one even earlier than that. But it seemed like the older the movie, the closer to the book it was getting, although I did not find a movie that was exactly stayed true to the book. Some examples of that also, of movies I found that maybe I didn't expect were actually Frankenstein stories or influenced by Frankenstein, would include stories like Edward Scissorhands. That's definitely a Frankenstein story. When you rewatch it, you realize, yeah, it's gotten a lot of influence from Frankenstein. Maybe even Nightmare Before Christmas. When you watch Jack come to life and the characters in that. What was another one? Oh, the first Pokemon movie, Mewtwo, is very much like Frankenstein. There's even a character in that movie who says Pokestein as a joke, because Mewtwo is like a mix of different Pokemon put together, or a clone of Mew that is kind of an unnatural creation. So you see this story show up in more modern stories over and over again, although they're not, completely true to this original story. I think that influence is important. And once you understand the symbology of the original story, you start to understand deeper the symbology of these retellings and these variations of the story. So I think that is important. Philosophy as well. There were mention of a few philosophers, a few scientists, humanists. I think all of those references in this Frankenstein story are very important. When you read an older story like this, you kind of get to know about what books were popular at the time, what may have been controversial, and kind of what they are promoting, the philosophies and the ideas that the author wants to promote within its own story and within its own book. So now I'm going to read a few quotes that I had saved. I don't think I saved a lot of the best ones that I wanted to show, but that's all right. I have some. One of which that I really liked, I don't know if I have it saved, was when the Frankenstein's monster was using biblical references to describe his own loneliness, and he was saying that, Adam had a counterpart, Eve, and even the devil has his demons to spend his time with, but Frankenstein felt completely and utterly alone, even more so than the devil. So let's see here. So this was pretty early on in the story. It says, "And now, dear Margaret, do I not deserve to accomplish some great purpose?" This is the main character speaking in his journal about his missions in life. "My life might have been passed in ease and luxury, but I preferred glory to every enticement that wealth placed in my path. Oh, that some encouraging voice would answer in the affirmative. My courage and my resolution is firm, but my hopes fluctuate, and my spirits are often depressed. I am about to proceed on a long and difficult voyage, the emergencies of which will demand all my fortitude. I am required not only to raise the spirits of others, but sometimes to sustain my own, when theirs are falling, or theirs are failing. This is the most favorable period for traveling in Russia. They fly quickly over the snow in their sledges. The motion is pleasant, and in my opinion, far more agreeable than that of an English stagecoach. The cold is not excessive. If you are wrapped in furs, a dress which I have already adopted, for there is a great difference between walking the deck and remaining seated motionless for hours, when no exercise prevents the blood from actually freezing in your veins. I have no ambition to lose my life on the post road. Participate in my joy if I am assailed by disappointment. No one will endeavor to sustain me in dejection. I shall commit my thoughts to paper. It is true, but that is a poor medium for the communication of feeling. I desire the company of a man who could sympathize with me, whose eyes would reply to mine. You may deem me romantic, my dear sister, but I bitterly feel the want of a friend. I have no one near me, gentle yet courageous, possessed of a cultivated as well as a capacious mind, whose tastes are like my own, to approve or amend my plans. How would such a friend repair the faults of your poor brother? I am too ardent in execution and too impatient of difficulties, but it is still greater evil to me that I am self-educated. For the first 14 years of my life I ran wild on a common and read nothing but our Uncle Thomas's books of voyages. At that age I became acquainted with the celebrated poets of our own country, which I believe is Russia, but it was only when it had ceased to be in my power to derive its most important benefits from such a conviction that I perceived the necessity of becoming acquainted with more languages than that of my native country. Now I am 28 and in reality more illiterate than many schoolboys of 15. It is true that I have thought more and that my daydreams are more extended and magnificent, but they want, as the painters call it, keeping, and so on. And I think I saved that because it was just relatable. I myself am almost 28 years old. I also sometimes feel that longing for a friend who is on the similar path as me or similar mindset. And I understand where he's coming from, where, his daydreams are more extended than the actuality. So I'm moving forward now. I think that was on page 8 of the book. This is on page 23. It says, having conquered the violence of his feelings, he appeared to despise himself for being the slave of passion and quelling the dark tyranny of despair. He led me again to converse concerning myself personally. He asked me the history of my earlier years. The tale was quickly told, but it awakened various trains of reflection. I spoke of my desire of finding a friend, of my thirst for more intimate sympathy with a fellow mind than had ever fallen to my lot, and expressed my conviction that a man could boast of little happiness who did not enjoy this blessing. I agree with you, replied the stranger. We are unfashioned creatures, but half made up. The stranger, by the way, is Dr. Frankenstein, speaking to the main character who picked him up on his ship. But half made up, if one wiser, better, dearer than ourselves, such a friend ought to be. Do not lend his aid to perfection our weak and faulty natures. I once had a friend, the most noble of human creatures, and am entitled, therefore, to judge respecting friendship. You have hope and the world before you, and have no cause for despair. But I have lost everything and cannot begin life anew. As he said this, his countenance became expressive of a calm, settled grief that touched me to the heart. But he was silent and presently retired to his cabin. Even broken in spirit as he is, no one can feel more deeply than he does the beauties of nature. The starry sky, the sea, and every sight afforded by these wonderful regions seem to still have the power of elevating his soul from earth. Such a man has a double existence. He may suffer misery and be overwhelmed by disappointments, yet when he has retired into himself, he will be like a celestial spirit that has a halo around him, within whose circle no grief or folly ventures. Will you smile at the enthusiasm I express concerning this divine wanderer? You would not if you saw him. You have been tutored and refined by books and retirement from the world, and you are therefore somewhat fastidious, but this only renders you the more fit to appreciate the extraordinary merits of this wonderful man. Sometimes I have endeavored to discover what quality it is he possesses that elevates him so immeasurably above any other person I ever knew. I believe it to be an intuitive discernment, a quick but never failing power of judgment, a penetration into the cause of things, unequaled for clearness and precision. Add to this a faculty of expression and a voice whose varied intonations are soul-subduing music. Damn. That description, I believe everyone desires to be on that level. Moving forward, another page that it says is, his character contained no pretension, but it sank deep. The disquisitions upon death and suicide were calculated to fill me with wonder. I did not pretend to enter into the merits of the case, yet I inclined towards the opinions of the hero, whose extinction I wept, without precisely understanding it. As I read, however, I applied much personally to my own feelings and condition. I found myself similar, yet at the same time strangely unlike, to the beings concerning whom I read and to whose conversation I was a listener. This is now Frankenstein's monster speaking. He was listening in on people, and he actually learned language just through listening and eventually by reading books. So he was really an outsider from the beginning. I sympathized with and partly understood them, but I was unformed in mind. I was dependent on none and related to none. The path of my departure was free, and there was none to lament my annihilation. My person was hideous and my stature gigantic. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. The volume of Plutarch's Lives, which I possessed, contained the histories of the first founders of the ancient republics. This book had a far different effect upon me from the sorrows of Werther. I learned from Werther's imaginations, despondency and gloom, but Plutarch taught me high thoughts. He elevated me above the wretched sphere of my own reflection to admire and love. Found on the ground a leather portmanteau containing several articles of dress and some books. So this is just showing what books you read. I saved this just to know. One of them was Paradise Lost, one was Plutarch's Lives, and the other was Sorrows of Werther. And it says, I can hardly describe to you the effect of these books. They produced in me an infinity of new images and feelings, and sometimes raised me to ecstasy, but more frequently sunk me into the lowest dejection. In the Sorrows of Werther, besides the interest of its simple and affecting story, so many opinions are canvassed, and so many lights thrown upon what had hitherto been, to me, obscure subjects, that I found in it a never-ending source of speculation and astonishment. The gentle and domestic manners it described combined with lofty sentiments and feelings. And he goes on to describe how much he loved those books. And another page, skipping forward, that I saved it says, a fiendish rage animated him as he sat. He was wrinkled into contortions too horrible for human eyes to behold, but presently he calmed himself and proceeded. I intended to reason. This passion is detrimental to me, for you do not reflect that you are the cause of its excess. This is Frankenstein's monster speaking after he was burned. If anything felt emotions of benevolence towards me, or if anyone or anything, I would return them 100 and 100-fold. For that one creature's sake, I would make peace with the whole kind. But I now indulge in dreams and bliss that cannot be realized. What I ask of you is reasonable and moderate. I demand a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself. The gratification is small, but it is all that I can receive, and it shall content me. It is true, we shall be monsters, cut off from all the world, but on that account we shall be more attached to one another. Our lives will not be happy, but they will be harmless and free from the misery I now feel. Oh, my Creator, make me happy. Let me feel gratitude towards you for one benefit. Let me see that I excite the sympathy of some existing thing. Do not deny me this request. I was moved, I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences of my contest, of my consent, but I felt that there was some justice in his argument. His tale and his feelings he now expressed proved him to be a creature of fine sensations, and did I not, as his maker, owe him all the portion of happiness that it was in my power to create? And that was when he was actually having thoughts about creating a counterpart for Frankenstein's monster, creating a female monster for him. But if you've read the story, you know that he changes his mind on that. He outweighs it and he thinks that it would cause more harm than good, that there's no way of guaranteeing they would stay away from society, and Frankenstein's monster had already committed murder multiple times for the pain that he felt. So Dr. Frankenstein made the decision not to create another, and therefore condemning himself to misery, because the monster would stop at nothing until he feels the same pain. So basically, Dr. Frankenstein's life was ruined. Everyone he loves is killed, whether it be Justine, whether it be his best friend, his counterpart Elizabeth, basically his whole family, his father, his younger siblings, and his wife, which was, I believe, his cousin growing up his whole life. He knew her. So this was definitely a tragedy, but at the same time, it was a beautiful story, and it talks about, it really teaches lessons about following your passion to your own demise, thinking that the ends justify the means, and not realizing the hole that you're digging for yourself can really end in misery. And I think this story is as old as time. It's portrayed in this Frankenstein story, but this is really the human story, the human experience. What is the difference between natural life and artificial life? What is the difference between being content and striving to be, one of the greats of history? Sometimes striving too far may make you lose everything that you have here. So, yeah, I definitely recommend this book. It was a great read, had a lot of lessons, and I'm excited for whatever book I decide to read next for the Psilo book review. Once again, the Psilo book review score is 927 out of 1,000, and this was book review number 3. Thank you for listening.